You see that wrinkled apple ring in an old jar on a shelf, and you think it's just dried fruit? It's not. That single jar is a year of food that never rotted, never needed a freezer, and never cost a dime to keep. I learned that from a woman who fed 7 children through winters with almost nothing. And today I'm handing you everything she taught me. Here's the truth most people never hear. You can take food that would spoil in 3 days and make it last 3 years, using nothing but warm air and patience. No fancy machine. No electricity, if you do it right. I doubted every word of this when I was broke and hungry, until it kept my cupboard full when my wallet was empty. And I'm going to save the best for last. There's a method the government printed in a wartime bulletin back in 1943, a trick so simple they mailed it to housewives to survive rationing, and almost nobody alive remembers it now. It works if you're living paycheck to paycheck this very week, with what's already sitting in your kitchen. Stay with me, because the last one changed how I eat forever. Let me take you back. I was 29 years old, standing in a kitchen in the dead of January, staring at a paycheck that was already gone before I cashed it. My grandmother sat at her table with a paring knife and a screen door she'd pulled off its hinges, and she was laying apple slices across that screen like she was placing gold. I thought she'd lost her mind. She looked up at me and said, "This screen fed us in 1934, and it'll feed you now." She was right. I've never forgotten it. Now here's the first thing she drilled into me, and it goes against everything you've been told. You do not need a dehydrator to dehydrate food. That machine on the store shelf for $80 is the newest way to do the oldest thing on earth. People have been drying food for at least 14,000 years. The oldest evidence archaeologists found comes from the Middle East, where folks dried fish and dates under the sun long before anybody had a wire to plug in. My grandmother never owned a machine in her life. She used the sun, the wind, the top of a wood stove, and that screen door. And when I finally tried it myself, laying thin apple slices on a rack in a warm oven left barely cracked open, I understood why she trusted it. 3 days later, I had a bag of sweet, chewy apple rings that cost me the price of a few apples and nothing else. No preservatives, no sugar added, just fruit and air. Here's why this matters more than you think. When you dry food, you're pulling out the water. Bacteria, mold, and yeast all need water to grow. Take the water away, and they simply can't live. The United States Department of Agriculture found that most foods need to lose about 80 to 90% of their moisture before they're safe to store long term. Do that, and your food goes dormant. It just waits for you. But here's where most people go wrong, and it's the mistake that made me throw out my first batch. I sliced everything too thick. Thick pieces trap water in the middle, and that trapped water breeds mold you can't even see until it's ruined the whole jar. My grandmother caught me and shook her head. "Thin as a coin," she said. "Thin as a coin, every time." That one rule saved me more food than any machine ever could. And it leads straight into the next secret, because slicing thin is only half the battle. The other half is a trick that stops your fruit from turning an ugly brown, and it's sitting in your kitchen right now. You've seen it happen. You slice an apple, and within minutes it goes brown and sad looking. That browning isn't just ugly. It's the food starting to break down, losing flavor and nutrition before it ever dries. For years I thought you needed some special powder from the store to stop it. My grandmother laughed at that idea. She reached for a lemon. Here's what she taught me. You take 1 part lemon juice and mix it with 1 part water in a bowl. Before you lay your fruit out to dry, you dunk the slices in that lemon water for about 5 minutes. The acid in the lemon stops the browning cold and helps the fruit keep its color and its vitamins. The University of Georgia's Extension Service, which has studied home food preservation for decades, still recommends this exact method today. A trick from a poor woman's kitchen, confirmed by scientists a lifetime later. If you don't have lemons, plain vinegar works too, or even a crushed vitamin C tablet dissolved in water. That's the beauty of it. There's always a way that costs almost nothing. I've used the juice from a lemon that was already going soft on my counter, one I'd have thrown away, and it worked perfectly. Now, I want you to understand something about why this knowledge nearly disappeared. Drying food was once as common as boiling water. Every farmhouse, every poor family, Every homestead knew how to do it. Then something changed. In the 1950s, the refrigerator and the freezer became the promise of modern life. Companies sold families the dream that you'd never need to dry, can, or save anything again. Just buy fresh, buy frozen, buy more, and slowly the old knowledge went quiet. Not because it stopped working, but because nobody makes money when you preserve your own food for free. A woman drying apples on a screen door isn't buying anything. She isn't a customer. So the skill got buried, called old-fashioned, treated like something only your poor relatives did. I believed that too, once. I was wrong, and it cost me years of wasted food and wasted money. Because here's what they didn't tell you. Dried food doesn't just last longer than frozen food. It survives a power outage. It survives a broken freezer. It survives the day the electricity bill gets too high to pay. My grandmother's dried apples didn't care if the lights were on. That independence is exactly what got left out of the sales pitch. But drying fruit is where most people stop, and that's a shame, because the real power of this skill is in something else entirely. It's in vegetables, and it's in the one thing that turned my thin grocery budget into full meals all winter long. Let me tell you about soup. When I was at my brokest, soup kept me alive. But fresh vegetables went bad so fast that half of what I bought rotted in the drawer before I could use it. My grandmother saw me toss a slimy bag of celery in the trash one day, and she stopped me. "Never again," she said, and she taught me the trick that changed everything. You take your vegetables, all of them, the carrots, the celery, the onions, the peppers, the ones getting a little soft, the ones on the discount rack. You chop them small, you dry them until they're crisp and rattle in your hand, and you store them in a jar. She called it soup dust when she ground it fine, or soup mix when she left it in pieces. A single jar held what used to be 3 grocery bags of vegetables. Here's the number that stunned me. When you dry vegetables properly, they shrink to a fraction of their size. A whole big bag of spinach dries down to something you could hold in one palm. The water leaves, but the nutrition mostly stays. Research from Penn State's extension program showed that properly dried vegetables keep the large majority of their nutrients for a year or more. You're not losing the good stuff. You're just losing the water that made it rot. And the cost? Almost nothing. I started buying vegetables when they were marked down at the end of the day. The stuff the store wanted rid of, sometimes 70% off. Vegetables about to be thrown out. I'd take them home, dry them that night, and turn trash prices into a jar of soup mix that lasted months. A handful of that in a pot of boiling water with a little salt, and I had a hot meal for pennies. There's a step here most people miss, and it matters for vegetables more than fruit. Some vegetables need to be blanched first, which just means dunking them in boiling water for a minute or two before drying. This stops the natural enzymes that would otherwise keep breaking the vegetable down even after it's dried. Carrots, green beans, peas, they all last far longer when you blanch them first. My grandmother did it without ever knowing the science. She just knew it worked, because her mother did it before her. But I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking this still sounds like it takes an oven running for hours, and you're watching that electric bill climb every month, and you're wondering if you can even afford to run the oven that long. I hear you. I've counted those same pennies. So let me stop right here and show you the way to do all of this for as close to free as it gets, using only what you already own. Because the oldest way to dry food never used any power at all. It used the sun. My grandmother's screen door wasn't just a table. It was a solar dehydrator, the same tool humans used for thousands of years. On a hot, dry day, you lay your thin fruit or vegetable slices on a clean screen or a rack. You cover them with a single layer of cheesecloth or a thin dish towel to keep the bugs off, and you set them in the strongest sun you have. A porch rail, a car dashboard, a sunny windowsill, a picnic table. I've dried apple rings on the dashboard of my old truck parked in the driveway. The sun turned that cab into an oven, and by evening my fruit was halfway done. It cost me nothing, not 1 cent of electricity. The heat that was already there, the heat that would have just warmed an empty seat, dried my food instead. If the sun isn't strong where you live, here's the next cheapest thing. Your oven has a pilot light or an interior light bulb that gives off a gentle warmth. In many ovens, just the heat from that little bulb with the door cracked, is enough to dry food slowly over a day or two. And if you run your heater in winter, the top of a radiator or a warm air vent will dry a tray of herbs or thin fruit for free using heat you're already paying for anyway. The point my grandmother hammered into me is this: you do not need to spend money to save food. The wealthy sold us the idea that you need equipment for everything, but the poor always knew the truth. Warmth and moving air are all it takes, and both of those are already around you right now doing nothing. You just have to put them to work. If you want to go deeper into this way of thinking, turning almost nothing into months of food, I put everything I know into a book called Poor Man Smart, part of a series that includes Poor Man Mastery and Poor Man System. It covers not just drying, but the whole quiet system that poor families use to stay fed no matter what came. You can find it linked in the description below. Now, back to what makes this method so remarkable. I remember the exact moment this clicked for me. I was standing in my kitchen with the last $12 I had until Friday, and instead of spending it, I dried a full box of bruised bananas somebody at the market gave me for free. I hung them near the wood stove. 3 days later, I had banana chips my kids fought over. $12 still in my pocket and food in the jar. That feeling, that's what this whole thing is about. Now, once you've dried your food, there's a hidden danger nobody warns you about, and it's the reason people give up on this after one bad batch. It's the moment right after drying, and if you skip it, mold can still ruin everything you worked for. Here's the secret step. It's called conditioning, and my grandmother did it without ever using that word. When you take your dried fruit out, some pieces are always a little drier than others, because no batch dries perfectly even. If you seal them all up together right away, the moisture from the wetter pieces spreads to the drier ones, and that little bit of dampness is all mold needs. So here's what you do. You put your dried food loosely in a jar, only about 2/3 full, and you seal it. For the next 7 to 10 days, you shake that jar once a day and you watch it. If you see any moisture, any fog on the glass, any dampness, the food isn't dry enough, and you put it back to dry more. If it stays dry and clear that whole week, then you know it's truly ready to store for the long haul. That 1 week of watching is what separates food that lasts 1 month from food that lasts 1 year. The University of Minnesota's Extension Service still teaches this exact conditioning step today, and it dates back generations before any of us. It's the difference between a full pantry and a jar of fuzzy ruined food, and it costs nothing but a little patience and a glass jar you already own. Once your food passes that test, storage is simple. Keep it in a clean, dry jar with a tight lid, out of the light, somewhere cool. Light and heat are the enemies of dried food. My grandmother kept hers in the back of a dark cupboard, and I've eaten dried apples from a jar that sat there the better part of 2 years and tasted like the day she made them. But I promised you something at the very start, and I keep my promises. I told you about a wartime method the government mailed to families in 1943, a trick so powerful they used it to help a whole nation survive rationing. This is the one that changed how I eat forever, and I've been waiting the whole video to give it to you. During the Second World War, food was rationed hard. Meat, sugar, butter, all of it was limited, and families were told to make everything stretch or go without. The government printed bulletins and pamphlets teaching ordinary housewives how to preserve every scrap of food they could get. And buried in those wartime instructions was a method for making something that could feed a person for weeks in an emergency, weighed almost nothing, and never spoiled. They needed soldiers and families to have food that survived anything. That method was making what old folks called leather, fruit leather, and more importantly, vegetable and even meat leathers. Here's how it works, and why it's the most powerful trick I know. You take fruit, any fruit, even the overripe stuff nobody wants, and you cook it down or mash it into a puree. You spread that puree thin, like a pancake, across a flat surface lined with parchment. Then you dry it in the sun or a warm oven until it peels up as a single, flexible sheet. That sheet is concentrated food. All the sugar, all the nutrition, all the calories of the whole fruit, pressed into something you can roll up and slip in your pocket. It weighs almost nothing. It lasts for months, and it costs you only the fruit that was going bad anyway. My grandmother made it from the plums off a tree in the yard, plums that would have rotted on the ground. She rolled the leather in wax paper and we ate it like candy all winter. But here's the part the wartime bulletins knew that almost nobody remembers now. You can do this with more than fruit. You can take your leftover vegetables, that soup mix, tomatoes, even cooked beans, puree it, spread it, and dry it into a savory leather. Break a piece into a pot of hot water and it turns back into soup or sauce. The soldiers carried versions of this. Explorers carried it. The native peoples of this continent made it for thousands of years from berries and meat, and they called the meat version pemmican. I tried the tomato version the first winter after my grandmother passed, almost as a way to remember her. I took a flat of tomatoes marked down to almost nothing because they were too soft to sell, cooked them down with a little salt, spread the puree thin, and dried it. What I got was a sheet of pure tomato that I could tear a piece off and drop into any pot to make instant sauce or soup. $1 of ruined tomatoes became a season of flavor. I stood in my kitchen and actually laughed out loud because it was so simple and so powerful and it had been hidden in plain sight the whole time. That's the thing that gets me, even now. This wasn't lost because it stopped working. It worked so well the government trusted it to feed a nation at war. It got buried because a world built on selling you food doesn't want you making your own from the scraps you'd have thrown out. The poor households kept it alive, quietly, in back cupboards and on screen doors, passing it hand to hand. And now you have it too. Let me give you the exact way to do it, so you can make it this weekend. Take whatever fruit is going soft in your kitchen right now. Bananas, apples, berries, plums, it doesn't matter. Mash it or blend it into a smooth puree. If it's tart, you can add a tiny bit of honey or sugar, but you don't have to. Line a baking sheet with parchment paper and pour the puree on so it spreads about a 1/4 inch thick, no thicker. Tilt the pan to make it even. Then dry it low and slow. In an oven on its very lowest setting with the door cracked, it takes about 6 to 8 hours. In strong sun, a full day. You'll know it's done when the top is no longer sticky and you can peel the whole sheet away from the parchment in one piece. Let it cool, roll it up in wax paper or parchment, and store it in a jar. It'll keep for months in the cupboard, longer in the freezer, if you have room. That's it. That's the whole thing that helped a nation survive. And once you understand leather, you start to see food completely differently. You stop throwing things away. The overripe bananas aren't garbage anymore. They're tomorrow's snack. The soft tomatoes aren't a loss. They're winter's sauce. The vegetables wilting in the drawer aren't a mistake. They're a jar of soup waiting to happen. That shift, from seeing scraps as trash to seeing them as stored wealth, is the real gift my grandmother handed me. The drying was just the how. The seeing was the treasure. I want to tell you one more thing she taught me, because it ties all of this together. She never dried food only to save money, though it did save money. She dried food so that no matter what happened, the price of groceries, the loss of a job, a hard winter, a broken freezer, there was always food in the house that belonged to her. Food nobody could take away or price out of reach. That's a kind of security you can't buy. You can only make it, one thin slice at a time. I think about her every time I open my cupboard and see those jars lined up. Apple rings, soup mix, tomato leather, dried herbs from the summer. A pantry built from bruised fruit and marked down vegetables and free scraps other people threw away. Every jar is a small act of refusing to be helpless. Every jar says, I will not go hungry just because times are hard. And here's what I've come to understand after all these years. The people who lived through the real hard times, the Depression, the war, the lean years, they weren't poor in knowledge. They were rich in it. They knew 100 ways to make nothing into something. We're the ones who got poor because we traded all that knowing for the convenience of buying, and we forgot how to make. Every skill like this one you take back is a piece of that wealth returning to your own 2 hands. So start small. Pick one thing this week. Slice an apple thin as a coin, dip it in lemon water, and lay it in a warm oven or a sunny window. Watch the water leave and the food stay. Feel what my grandmother felt with that screen door in 1934, the quiet pride of turning almost nothing into something that lasts. Then make your leather. Then fill your first jar. Before you know it, you'll have a pantry that doesn't care what the store charges. What you just recovered isn't a cooking tip. It's the same quiet security that carried poor families through the hardest years this country ever saw, handed back to you jar by jar, so you never have to feel helpless in your own kitchen again. You're the kind of person who refuses to waste what others throw away, and who refuses to be fooled into thinking you need to buy what you can make with your own hands. That's exactly who this knowledge was always meant for. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me, have you ever tried making that tomato leather, or is there a food your own grandmother dried that I didn't mention here? Leave it in the comments below, because I read them, and I want to build a list of these old methods before they disappear for good. Tell me what your family used to make, and where in the world you're watching from. And if you believe this knowledge should never have been buried in the first place, subscribe and stand with the rest of us who are quietly digging it back up, one forgotten trick at a time. Next, I'm going to show you how those same Hard Times families kept eggs fresh for 6 months without a refrigerator, using one thing you probably have under your sink right now. You won't believe how simple it is. I'll see you there. This video gave you the overview. But if you want to come deeper with me, inside the Poor Man's Circle, I walk you through the full no-machine drying method, food by food, picking up right where we stopped. In there, you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself, never a machine. And you won't be alone. Thrifty folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel any time. No risk.